Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 959. I start out here with d4. My opponent went d5. I go for the Queen's Gambit with c4 and he plays e6. The Queen's Gambit declined. So this is all very normal. Let's say I go knight c3, the main move there. And he plays bishop b4, which I called the Rogozin. First, let's get the arrow right. I called this the Rogozin variation in the video, but actually it's not. Once again, there's a wrinkle here. The Rogozin variation is really after the moves knight f6 and knight f3, which you can see were the top choices, the most popular moves, and that's how I would have played after knight f6. Then bishop b4. This is the Rogozin variation. And as I mentioned in the video, there's a couple lines here you have. You can play queen a4 check, and sorry, he will block with knight c6 and defend the bishop that way. It's kind of an interesting line. Let's see, did I look at that? Yeah, I did. Let's follow this out for a little bit. Queen a4 check, knight c6, e3, just defending the pawn, castles, bishop d2, unpinning. Maybe he still has the idea of coming in here, so it helps to unpin, so you have the option. And it's an interesting position. There's also the Vienna variation after bishop b4. Let's see. Queen a4 check. Instead of queen a4 check, there's bishop to g5. The counterpin, that's known as the Vienna variation. That's a very sharp line. And there's just the normal move taking. But let's go back to the game, because that's not what happened in the game. He played after e6, I went knight c3. He went bishop b4 immediately. So this is not the Rogozin variation, although you can see it's pretty similar. But we haven't played the knight move. So if I were to play knight f3 here, which is the top choice, that would transpose back into the normal lines of the Rogozin, I guess. I played e3, which is the second choice and seems to be very reliable as well. What's interesting is you can still play the same three moves that you would play against the Rogozin. So queen a4 check, at least at a short evaluation, was the top choice of the chess engine. I'm a little suspicious of these lines. You have to have some kind of plan to get your queen back into the game, because after, queen to a4 check and knight to c6, your queen is just sitting there. I mean, it's keeping the pin on, but at some point you have to wonder if it's really the best spot for the queen, just sitting over there on a4. So you have to learn how to play those lines, I think, is the lesson there. But also just taking, or let's see, what's the other, or knight f3 or e3. So those all seem to be reasonable responses, just as they are against the Rogozin. But I played e3 and defends the pawn, and nothing particularly bad has happened here. After knight f6, I went to bishop d3, and actually we've kind of transposed into a line of the Nimzo-Indian. If he were to castle here, this would be a line of the Nimzo-Indian, because a lot of times after putting the knight out and the bishop out, pawn on e6, and then castling, black will follow up with d5. So black could get to the same position in a different move order. So you could think of this as a line of the Nimzo-Indian, where he's delayed castling and played c5. And here, knight f3, once again, is a reasonable move. Taking is probably okay as well. I played a3, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with that. It just is a bit unusual. Here, let's check. Were there any other lines I wanted to look at here? No, that was about it. I think, as I mentioned, castling in this position would just transpose into a line of the Nimzo-Indian. So we're kind of skating along the lines between the Queen's Gambit declined and the Nimzo-Indian, which is characteristic of the Rogozin variation. It has a lot of similarities with the Nimzo. Anyway, he went c5 here. It's an interesting way to play, just challenging the center. And I played a3, kicking the bishop. I was going to take, which you see is one of the top choices here. I didn't really consider knight f3, but that also seems like a very logical move in retrospect. But I was kind of waiting to see what he wanted to do with his bishop. So I put the question to the bishop with a3. And he played this interesting move, c takes d4. Now, I've played this way myself once. I did this once in an over-the-board game when I was playing the Nimzo as black. I took here because it leads to an interesting trade. But I don't think it's the best move here. The chess engine prefers bishop takes. And after pawn takes, then just castling. And yeah, castling. And black should be in fine shape. There's maybe something a little bit questionable about this c takes d4 idea because, well, you see we're out of the opening book at this point. And in the opening book, the one game they had was e takes d4, which is not very challenging. I think, to really challenge this line, you need to take the bishop, grab the bishop pair and suffer the pawn damage. It's the typical Nimzo-Indian trade-off. But compared to other Nimzo-Indian lines, what white gets here is a lot more open position for his bishop. So it's actually better than the bishop pair is worth more in these lines than typically. And even though it involves a pawn sacrifice, white comes out of this pretty well. And this is also true of many positions in the Nimzo-Indian that white can afford to sacrifice a pawn on c3 and get active play, and it's a decent line for white. And that seems to be what happened in this game. Right here is an interesting point. I immediately took back. The chess engine thinks the strongest continuation is actually to take on d5 first and allow white to recapture the pawn this way. Say he takes with the knight, I take here, knight takes c3. There were other lines besides this. I just thought this was interesting. Queen d2, because at first it seems that black is getting a lot of activity and black has won a pawn, but well, now the knight has to retreat. I guess queen c7 is just going to lead to more trouble. Well, I can continue to pile up on the knight, so the knight's going to have to come back eventually. So it drops back. And you can see black has a pawn, just as we had in the game, but it's quite an open position, and which is good for the bishop pair, which is white's advantage, and also white has a lead in development. So this is a position which is good for white, even better than the game. Although this position was also good for white, I just took back immediately. I really didn't think about that other line. He takes, I take, and then he traded queens. He didn't have to do that. He did win a pawn, but he could win the pawn this way. He could play queen c7, putting pressure here. And I could move my queen here and try and hold on to things, but actually the chess engine recommends just retreating the bishop, ditching the pawn right away, and gaining those tempos. It's important to chase the queen with the bishop, so that your queen defends the rook in the corner. If we back up a step, this check looks dangerous because it is a fork of those two pieces, but bishop t2 covers everything, and white is in good shape once again after the queen retreats. White has good development and open lines for the bishop pair, and black has a pawn. So that's interesting. Anyway, he went for the endgame. He traded queens and played knight e4, which is a pretty interesting move. It's a fork. It hits the c3 pawn and it hits the f2 pawn. So this is another way that black can win a pawn. But, well, just as in the other lines, white has good compensation. So king e1 was the move I played. The chess engine says also knight h3 is equally good. But the important point is to defend this pawn, give up the c pawn, and have active bishops. So I went king e1, he went knight takes c3, and went bishop b2. And at this point, he's going to have to retreat that knight. And once again, white has full compensation for the pawn. I'm not getting the pawn back. It's too dangerous to take here after he plays knight e4. It just opens up a line for his rook. I don't want to help his development. My advantage is I have good development and active pieces. I don't want to grab a pawn back and then give those advantages to black. So I played f3 here, kicking his knight. He continues to drop back and move my bishop away, and he castles. The chess engine didn't like castle. It actually liked king e7 here. So maybe allows the rook to come into the game this way, and also, well, the king in the center in the endgame is often where you want it to be. So castling, maybe not the best move here. So for the next section of the game, it's pretty even to better for white, depending on slight inaccuracies by one side or the other, but pretty reasonable play from both sides. So let's continue. See, I went knight e2 here. He went knight f5. Yeah, this is one of those slight mistakes. He should probably continue developing with bishop d7. So rather than keeping on moving this same piece, but he did spot a loose pawn here. But that just allows me to bring my king forward and defend it. So he's helped me out a little bit. I get to bring my king forward. I get to connect my rooks. And he's moved the same piece once again without developing his other pieces. But now he starts developing. And now I make a slight mistake. The chess engine really likes to move b5, which I thought about. Didn't quite evaluate this correctly. But b5, the knight really has to go back to d8. And, I wasn't sure if this pawn would be overextended, but the chess engine says everything is fine here. And certainly I have grabbed a lot of space and I've pushed his pieces back. So it's kind of logical. If the knight comes forward, the chess engine is recommending just bringing the rook over. And this knight doesn't really have any good follow-up moves. It's kind of stuck there. So the chess engine is giving a big advantage to white in this position. Maybe I can actually win that knight because it's basically trapped, right? It can't go here or here because of the pawn. Could come back here, but that would win some material at least. It would allow me to win another pawn, and these other squares are now covered. So black is definitely in trouble after a move like that. So anyway, b5 is the move in this position. But I played bishop to c3, and as I said, the advantage swings back and forth. It's either good for white or maybe about even, but in that range, and now we're back to probably about even. Let's see, continues with b6. Play e4, kicking this knight. Drops back to e7. Bring my rook to the center, so this is a good move. Activating my pieces. So he comes out with his knight to g6. Also a good move. Once again, I was thinking of playing b5, kicking the knight, but now he's got a good square on e5 to go to. So I refrained and I pushed on with f4. So I think gaining space on the king side seems to be okay. Seems like a reasonable plan. Let's see, he went knight c7, went rook a2, preparing to double my rooks. He went bishop b7. So he has managed to unwind, and I think, we're in that range of about even along here. But, my king, once again, my pieces are just slightly more active. My king is closer to the center. My rooks are on the open file. My bishops are looking on good diagonals. Let's see, he played rook f to c8 here, hitting my bishop. The other rook f to c8, hitting my bishop. Played rook d to a1. Yeah, my bishop was defended. I didn't I didn't worry about him giving up the exchange, and I'm attacking the pawn on a7. So he protects it by pushing it forward. Let's see, I played bishop d4, attacking the other pawn, which he also pushed forward. And now I've got this case of one pawn holding back two pawns, which is good for the endgame sometimes, but I have to, so I've kind of neutralized the queen side for now, but I have to eventually convert my advantage into some material over here on the king side, or maybe some piece advantage. So let's see how it goes from here. He goes, let's see, I went b5. He went b5. I go bishop to c5. Yeah, get a good perch for this bishop. I'm taking a look at this knight. He played knight to c6, went to rook to c1. So rook c1 apparently is a missed opportunity here. I was worried at this point that he could push forward with a5 and undermine my bishop here. And once this pawn is gone, this bishop is loose and in the glare of his rook, and the knight could hop in maybe to this square, hitting my bishop, or I guess more realistically, the knight comes over to this square and hits this loose bishop here, so I'd have two pieces hanging. So a little bit, I felt it was a little bit precarious here, and I played rook to c1. The chess engine finds a more ingenious defense here with knight to d4. So I thought this was kind of cool. So now if he plays a5, I can take here and then grab the pawn. So my bishop stays well anchored there. And let's see, I don't have to worry about him taking my knight. Well, I can just take back with the bishop, and he's gotten rid of one of his, that knight was a pretty active piece. So this is also good for me if he takes my knight. So anyway, that would be the best way to unwind. I played rook to c1, and he played knight to e7. So right here he could have gone a5. So rook to c1 didn't really prevent a5, and this is interesting. I can take here now because my bishop is defended, but when he takes back, he's hitting this loose bishop, and I don't have anything better to do than defend the bishop, which means that now I'm giving up the bishop pair, and at this point the advantage swings to black, because without the bishop pair I don't have enough compensation for the fact that he has an extra pawn over here. If I tried to retreat my bishop, the only square it could go to, notice that this is covered, this is covered, this is covered, and if I go here, this is loose. So my only square that I could go to at first glance is bishop to d1, but then he has this clever move, knight to d4 check. So it's a tempo move, hitting my king with check and leaving my bishop undefended there. So that would lose a piece. So that's why in this position I'm actually required to defend my bishop with rook b2, and that leads to an advantage for black. So that was black's big chance in this game after I played rook c1. So he missed that. He played knight e7, which is otherwise a reasonable move, and I push ahead on the king side with g4. Chess Engine likes rook d2 here, so it really wants me to activate my rooks on the d file. And I have to agree, that's also a good move. Let's see, he went e5, and I went f5. So e5 seems to have been a bit of a mistake again, and after this I have a pretty big advantage. And in fact, well, his next move, rook d8, allows a tactic. So so here's your tactical quiz for this video. What's the best move for white in this position? Pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now, but you should be able to figure this one out. So spend some time and figure it out. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. The answer is I just take this knight. He has to take back. And then there's this fork. He's got two loose pieces. So it's a very typical exchange and fork type of tactic, not too hard to spot. So I hope you got that one. So instead of rook d8, he needed to play king f8 to hold on to that knight and prevent that tactic. Although, you know, it's now in a pin, and once again I can bring my rook over to the d file and pile up. So it's a pretty dicey situation for black in any case. I think in all lines black is worse at this point. But let's see, he went rook d8, and I missed the tactic. I played knight to c3 instead. And let's see, he's trying to rearrange his pieces. He dropped this knight back to c8. I brought my knight forward to d5. He went knight d4. Brought his knight into a good square, and I just took it off at this point. So I'm giving up the bishop pair, but I'm giving a pawn back. I'm getting a pawn back. And so now the material is even, and I still have the more active pieces, and particularly this king is a good piece for the endgame. It's very active, and it can't be easily beaten back. Let's see, he went knight b6 here, trying to take advantage of my pinned knight, and I went rook c7, trying to precipitate some action here before things fall apart. Because if he gets enough force piled up on my knight, I might be in a bit of trouble here. So I just wanted to force things to happen, and he obliged by taking, but that's a mistake. He actually needs to just defend here. Well, you can understand why black didn't want to play a move like that, but after bishop takes d5, then I have a pretty big edge here. Let's see, because I have this passed pawn, which as we saw later in the game, that becomes a huge threat. So I'm going to keep that pawn. He's trying to bring his king into the game and bring my other rook into the game via the e file. Let's see, he went oh, there was an idea here actually. Rook to c6. I mean, rook e2 I liked as a way to bring the rook into the game, but actually leaving the rook here and playing rook c6 is very strong as well, because the knight is under attack. Let's see, if this rook comes over to defend, then I start pushing this pawn forward and it gets in trouble that way. If this rook comes over to defend, then I take this pawn, And if the knight moves out of the way, then I can take that pawn as well. So the pawn on a6 is a goner here after rook c6. So that's a nice idea. Rook e2 is a good move. Just not quite as strong as rook c6. Let's see, he went rook to d6 here, defending and trying to activate. But actually, the best defense here was knight to c8. And that just prevents my rook from coming into the e7 square where I got to in the game. And he really needed to prevent that. So at this point, it's a little hard for me to continue actually on this e-file. And the best move is actually to go back to a2. And if he returns, then I have to try that rook c6 idea. Hopefully I will have spotted it by then. And so, I mean, it's still leaving me with a winning advantage, but it's a little bit of backtracking if he just defends passively with knight c8. Not the kind of move you want to play, but sometimes you have to defend. Anyway, I played rook e2. He went rook d6. Now I get my rooks on the 7th rank. And it is just completely winning from here on out. So we can just step through this. It was a little bit of maneuvering here to try and figure out how to take the best advantage of my my pieces. But let's see, he sacrificed another pawn here. I didn't even bother to take it because it's not really going anywhere. I can always grab it before it hits the touchdown. I wanted to take advantage of this rook over here, which was nearly trapped at this point. Let's see, he played rook d8, which is a way to get out of the trap. When I kick the rook, he can take here. So I blocked with rook, which one? The e rook to d7. So he gave the check. I had to go back, and then he decided to take. Let's see, if he had gone back, I might have tried blocking this way. Eventually, I think I would have broken through here. And the chess engine says this is all just winning because after that pawn is defended, then once again this rook is trapped. So he went ahead and exchanged here. I took with the pawn. Taking with the rook was also possible and good. Let's see, he went king e8. And now I pry his rook loose from this square. After this exchange, he brings his rook over to b6, and I just push on with f6. The key idea is to defend this pawn so that my rook is free to come to the back rank and chase his king away. Let's see, and if he retreats, then I can just mop up these pawns. And I can also take on g7 and create another threat to queen like that. So all this is looking well. It is just completely winning. Anyway, he tried. Let's see. I went f6. He exchanged first, and then played the check, and then dropped his rook back so he can check me from behind. But this is a little bit too late. I'm chasing his king away. It's an important finesse not to queen right away because then he could just exchange everything out. But you check once again. This is a very common tactic. And even if this square weren't protected and he was able to move here, you would still be able to push this pawn forward with a check. In this case, he can't even do that. That's not a legal move. So he has to run away. So he can't stay in touch with the pawn. And then I can queen. And it's actually a check as well, so he's forced to exchange, so he can't even hope for some kind of a perpetual check of my king or something like that. So he resigned at this point. Anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you again next time. Bye now.